For 6 months, my life had been quiet, orderly. I was freelancing, paying my bills. My apartment was sterile, exactly how I liked it. It was a world away from the controlled chaos of the family business I'd been forced out of. Then the phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered, cautiously. A man's voice, stressed, asked if this was Anna. He said his name was Michael Vance. The Michael Vance, CEO of Innovate Dynamics, our biggest client. My biggest client. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. He said, "Thank God. Listen, your brother is sending me nonsense projections for the fourth quarter launch. They're algorithmically impossible. I need the real Keystone forecast you built. Can you send it over?" Keystone. My model. The proprietary analytics engine that was the entire heart of the business. The one I built from scratch. I was frozen. I told him, my voice sounding strange and distant. "Michael, I don't work there anymore." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Not an awkward pause, a confused one, a dangerous one. Then he said the words that changed everything. He said that wasn't what my family had told him. He said they told him I'd stepped back for personal health reasons, but that I was still consulting. And it clicked. The memory wasn't just a memory anymore, it was evidence. My mother, her hand on my arm, her voice dripping with that specific, condescending sweetness. "David just has the right temperament for the clients, honey. It's for the good of the family." It wasn't a suggestion, it was the first page of their script. And that feeling when your gut tells you something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. It's a physical thing, isn't it? Have you ever had a single phone call that made you question everything you thought was true? Tell me about it below, because the final piece was when he told me my brother, David, had been sending him weekly reports. Reports, based on my model, for 6 months. Every week, a new lie with my name on it. He wasn't just using my work, he was actively pretending to be me. I don't remember how I ended the call. I think I promised to look into it. The moment I hung up, the quiet of my apartment felt different. Hostile. The carefully constructed story they'd fed me, that it was about streamlining, that David was better suited for leadership. It wasn't just a lie to get me out of the way, it was a cover story for a heist. They didn't just replace me. They erased me. The phone call with Michael Vance ended, and the adrenaline hit me like a physical blow. There was no time for shock, not yet. That comes later. First, you get the facts. I went straight to my laptop, my movements stiff, automatic. I navigated to the company's internal server login, MMI server login. The architecture was mine, every line of code, every security protocol. I typed in my credentials, the ones that had been my digital keys to the kingdom for 5 years. The screen flashed red. Access denied. I took a breath. Fine. They were thorough. I tried the admin backdoor, a command line entry I'd built into the core system for catastrophic failures, an emergency kill switch that only I knew about. Access denied. My blood ran cold. That wasn't just changing a password. That was rewriting the foundation. I clicked forgot password, a last, desperate attempt. I typed in my personal email address. The system replied with a single, sterile sentence. "No account is associated with this email address." They hadn't just locked the doors, they'd burned the blueprints. They'd salted the earth. And it all clicked into place. My brother, David, 2 weeks before they pushed me out, coming to my desk with that earnest, helpful look on his face. He told me he was creating a security redundancy plan and needed a full list of all admin passwords and backdoors. Not for redundancy, for a purge. What's the most passive-aggressive way someone has ever shut you out? Getting locked out of your own creation by someone using the keys you gave them. It has to be at the top of the list, right? I tried the last place I could think of, the shared family cloud storage. Old business plans, tax documents, contracts. My access had been revoked. Every digital trace of my work, my contribution, my existence within that company had been systematically wiped. This wasn't a mistake. This is a fortress, and I'm on the outside. My hands moved with a new purpose then. A grim forensic resolve. If the internal world was a fortress, I'd survey the exterior walls. I opened a new browser window and went to the company website. The About Us page loaded. My profile, my headshot, my biography, gone. Vanished. In its place was my brother. David's photo was there, looking confident, looking like a leader. His new title was CEO and Chief Strategist. I read his biography. It listed accomplishments. Hemi 9 accomplishments. It detailed projects. Pemi project. And then I saw it, in black and white, the line that made my stomach clench, where he developed the proprietary Keystone Analytics model. I navigated to LinkedIn. His profile was a monument built on my career. Post after post about Assistant's successes with Innovate Dynamics, using data from a Mana model. And the comments, industry colleagues, people I knew, people I'd worked with, all congratulating him. Has anyone ever taken credit for your work in a public way? Let me know how you handled it, or how you wish you'd handled it. Because in that moment, I understood my father's words from a holiday dinner last year. He'd been praising David for his natural people skills, then turned to me and said my intense focus on data was a little too intense for a true leader. It wasn't an observation, it was a justification. They were laying the groundwork for the narrative, for the theft. To them, my competence was a technical skill to be exploited, while his charm was a qualification for ownership. He wasn't just sitting at my desk. He's wearing my reputation like a costume. My mind shifted gears. The forensic part of my brain took over completely. If they stole my professional identity, my work, my reputation, what else did they feel entitled to? What else had they taken? I opened a new tab and logged into my online banking portal. I navigated to an old checking account, one I shared with my mother. It was supposed to be dormant, untouched for years, a relic from when I first helped with household bills. And there it was. A small, recurring monthly charge I didn't recognize. FinGraph Pro, business tier. I didn't need to guess. I Googled it anyway. It was a high-end financial modeling software, the exact kind of program a person would need if they wanted to mimic my Keystone model without having the talent to actually build it themselves. The subscription had started the month after I was forced out. They were clumsy. And my mother's voice echoed in my head from years ago, when she'd insisted I keep my name on that emergency joint account. She'd assured me it was just a precaution, that it wouldn't be used. It wasn't a precaution. It was a calculated move to keep a financial link to me, a backdoor to my money. Drop a in the comments if you love the moment a villain gets sloppy. What's the smallest detail that ever gave away a huge secret in your life? This was the first thread. The first piece of hard financial evidence. It wasn't just professional theft anymore. This was personal. This was my money. A cold, sharp flicker of satisfaction cut through the anger. They had made a mistake. A small one, but a mistake nonetheless. You used my own money to buy the cheap knockoff of my work. And that's when the truly sickening thought landed. A thought so awful, so profound, it felt like a physical impact. The stolen work. The stolen reputation. The stolen money. My brother's casual request months ago. For my social security number. For a family phone plan update, he'd said. My fingers were trembling, but I moved with certainty. I navigated to the official government site for a free annual credit report. I filled in my details. My name. My address. My social security number. The report loaded. I stopped breathing. It wasn't a small, clumsy fraud. It was an avalanche, a business loan. For $250,000. Taken out in my name, 3 months ago. The lender was a small, out-of-state bank I'd never heard of. The business address listed was a P.O. box. And the CO signer, the person who had guaranteed this fraudulent debt taken out in my name, was my father. The silent chairman. His vague talk of investing in David's vision wasn't just empty praise. It was a confession. This is the moment the game changes. What would you do first? Scream? Cry? Or call a lawyer? Let me know in the comments. The floor dropped out of my world. This wasn't about being pushed out of a job. This wasn't about my brother's ego or my parents' favoritism. This was grand larceny. This was felony identity theft. This was federal bank fraud. The shock was immense, a tidal wave of ice and betrayal, but as it washed over me, something else was left in its place. The cold, hard, methodical resolve of a forensic accountant who had just been handed the case of her life. This is a crime scene, and they made me the primary suspect. I closed the credit report window. The numbers, that impossible life-altering $250,000, seemed to hang in the air in front of me. The shock was a physical thing, a high frequency ringing in my ears. But then, something else took over. The part of me that was trained to find the signal in the noise. The part of me that thrives in the data. The shock receded, and what was left behind was ice. My body moved before my mind had fully caught up. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out of my apartment. I didn't drive to the nearest store. I drove 2 towns over. I walked into a big box retailer and I paid cash for a new, cheap disposable laptop and a prepaid untraceable Wi-Fi hotspot. No credit cards, no loyalty numbers. I was a ghost. Back in my apartment, I didn't even consider connecting the new machine to my home network. They were in my bank accounts, my company servers. I had to assume they were everywhere. I powered on the hotspot and created a new encrypted email address. The name was a random string of letters and numbers. Nothing connected to me. From there, a new secure cloud storage subscription, paid for with a prepaid gift card I bought with cash. And I remember this instructor from a cybersecurity seminar the company paid for me to attend years ago. He was this intense ex-military guy who stressed that when you suspect internal fraud, your personal devices are compromised. Your network is compromised. You operate from a clean room. He'd said you have to build a digital fortress before you can even think about going on the attack. It's funny. The training they paid for to protect the business was now the very training I was using to build a case against them. My first upload to the secure cloud was the evidence I already had. The screenshot of the fraudulent FinGraph Pro charge from the joint bank account, the public LinkedIn page where my brother was cosplaying as a tech genius using my work, and the PDF of the credit report, the fraudulent $250,000 loan. Are you the type to plan every detail before a confrontation, or do you dive in head first? I'm building my case file now. What would be your first piece of evidence? My apartment wasn't my home anymore. It was a command center, a war room. Every action was deliberate, designed to be completely invisible. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the lead investigator. And there's one rule you learn on day 1 of any investigation. The first rule of an audit: to cure your evidence. On the new clean laptop, I opened a spreadsheet program. I created a new file. I titled it Project Reclamation. The process was clinical, methodical. It was oddly soothing. To take the chaos, the raw, screaming emotion of the betrayal, and translate it into structured data. It gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since the phone call. I created 4 columns. Column A, date of event. Column B, evidence, document, link. Column C, individuals involved. And the final, most important column, D, crime violation. I began to populate it. Row 1, the initial phone call from Michael Vance. Row 2, the claims on the company website and David's LinkedIn profile. Row 3, the fraudulent software subscription. Row 4, the big one, the $250,000 loan application. I stared at column C, individuals involved. I created subcolumns. One for David, the golden child CEO. One for my mother, the chief gaslighting officer. And one for my father, the silent chairman. I started meticulously logging who was complicit in which act. And as I filled the cells, a pattern began to emerge from the data, stark and undeniable. David was the face of the operation, the one enjoying the lifestyle and the public credit. My mother was the emotional mastermind, the one who created the justifications and managed the cover-up. And my father, he was the bank. the silent partner who enabled the entire conspiracy through willful ignorance and his own signature. I suddenly remembered a time I was building a complex spreadsheet to track project milestones for the business. It was intricate, detailed, cross-referenced. My mother had looked over my shoulder and sighed. She'd told me I was being obsessive, that I made things too complicated. Well, this obsession, this ability to see the connections in the data, it was now my single most powerful weapon. For all my organized people out there, what's your go-to tool for making sense of chaos? A spreadsheet? A journal? A whiteboard? Show me your methods. I was building the blueprint for their downfall, one cell at a time. The conspiracy wasn't random, it was organized. And now, so was my case against it. This was the moment I drew the line. No more, he said, she said. From now on, we only speak in facts. With my evidence matrix established, I opened a secure browser on the clean laptop. My research had to be as methodical as my evidence gathering. I didn't Google my family stole my identity. That's a victim search term. I was an investigator. I used precise, legal language. I searched for the federal statutes on wire fraud. I looked up the exact definition and penalties for bank fraud. I researched aggravated identity theft and federal credit application fraud. I found the specific laws, the sentencing guidelines, the clear, unemotional elements required by a prosecutor to prove each case beyond a reasonable doubt. For each piece of evidence in my spreadsheet, I now had the law it violated. I went back to my evidence matrix, to column D, crime, violation. I replaced my own angry emotional descriptions with the cold, hard language of the United States Code. The fake reports to Michael Vance weren't just lies anymore. They were top-wire fraud. The $250,000 loan wasn't just a loan. It was bank fraud, punishable by decades in prison and millions of dollars in fines. When you've been wronged, do you focus more on the emotional hurt or the practical injustice? Let me know if you're team feelings or team facts. Because for me, in that moment, the emotional weight of the betrayal was being replaced by the cold, hard weight of the law. And I remembered my father's favorite phrase. The one he used to end any and every family argument. We keep it in the family, he'd always say. We don't involve outsiders. I see it now. That wasn't a principle of family loyalty. It was a strategy. It was a rule designed to allow them to operate without consequences, without accountability. It was the code of a conspiracy. But they had underestimated me. They assumed the daughter they'd raised would crumble. They never imagined she would build a prosecution. Understanding the sheer scale of the legal jeopardy they had willingly, arrogantly placed themselves in, it was a profound surge of power. They didn't just break my trust. They broke federal law. My evidence matrix was clean, clinical, and growing every day. But it was all digital. I needed something physical. Something they couldn't dismiss as a hack or a misunderstanding. I needed paper. And I knew exactly where to find it. My father, the silent chairman, is an old-school man. He distrusts the cloud. He distrusts paperless billing. He believes in the tangible reality of a file cabinet. And I knew his system by heart. I called my mother. I kept my voice light, casual. I told her I was cleaning out my storage unit and realized I'd left a few old boxes of sentimental items in their attic. Things from high school. I asked if I could stop by for 20 minutes to grab them. She was thrilled. Her voice was warm, inviting. It was the voice of someone who believes they have gotten away with it. Walking into my childhood home was a surreal experience. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall was a memory. But the nostalgia was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. My mother, the CGO, hovered. She made small talk about my freelance work, about how I was doing. Her concern felt like a performance. I just nodded and smiled, waiting for my opportunity. It came when her phone rang, a friend from her book club. She walked into the kitchen, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. That was my window. I slipped into the home office. It smelled the same, old books and my father's cologne. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. But my hands were steady. I went to the large oak file cabinet in the corner. And suddenly I was a teenager again, and my father was teaching me his filing system. A place for everything, and everything in its place, Anna, he'd said. He was so proud of his meticulous organization. He never imagined that one day I would use his own methodical nature as a weapon against him. I pulled open the third drawer down. Financials, joint accounts. And there it was. A manila folder, thick with statements for the account I shared with my mother. The dormant one. I pulled it out. My fingers moving quickly, quietly. I laid the statements on the desk, took out my phone and photographed every single page from the last 6 months. The click of the phone's camera sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. I put the folder back, slid the drawer shut, and was out of the office in less than 60 seconds. Have you ever had to go back to a place that held good memories but for a terrible reason? It's a uniquely awful feeling, isn't it? The person I was in this house was gone. The family I thought I had was gone. Everything looks the same, but nothing is. This is just a place with evidence now. Back in the sterile safety of my war room, I uploaded the photos to my secure cloud. The resolution was perfect. I started analyzing the transactions, and it was immediately clear. That little software subscription was just the tip of the iceberg. There were multiple large cash withdrawals. Payments to high-end restaurants I knew my brother couldn't afford. And then I saw it. A recurring payment to a credit card I didn't recognize. The statement only provided the last 4 digits of the card number, but it was a start. Then another line item, a $500 monthly payment to a luxury car leasing company. A hunch, cold and certain, formed in my mind. I opened my brother's Instagram profile. His feed was a portfolio of a life he hadn't earned. I started cross-referencing the dates. A $1,000 cash withdrawal from the joint account on November 10th? On November 12th, David posted a photo of himself and his friends at a ski lodge in Aspen, with the caption "Spontaneous trips are the best." The payment to the luxury car lease company on the 5th of every month? On the 7th of the month 3 months ago, he'd posted a picture of himself leaning against a brand new sports car. His dream car. The one he'd begged my parents for years. And I remembered my mother's words to him, that placating tone she used when she was making a promise. "When the time is right, David," she'd said, "we'll make sure you have everything you need to look the part." The right time, apparently, was when they could use my credit and my name to finance his image. What's the most clueless thing you've ever seen a person post online? Sometimes the internet provides all the receipts you need. My brother's desperate need for validation, his obsession with his public image, was creating a perfect, time-stamped, unimpeachable trail of evidence against himself. This was more than just a smoking gun. This was a confession broadcast to the world, paid for with stolen money. The grim satisfaction I felt was immense. He wasn't just a fraud, he was an arrogant, sloppy one. He's not just committing fraud. He's bragging about it. I kept digging into the statements. I'd accounted for the withdrawals, the large payments that funded David's lifestyle. But something else didn't make sense. The account was being drained, but it never went into overdraft. It was being managed. I scrolled back through the transaction histories, looking at the other side of the ledger. The deposits. And that's where I found it. The key to the entire conspiracy. It wasn't a salary deposit. It wasn't a business transfer. It was a series of small, recurring transfers into the joint account. The source was my mother's personal savings account. The transfers were irregular. $200 here, $350 there. But they were consistent in their timing. They always appeared a day or two before a large expense was paid out. Just enough to keep the account liquid. Just enough to cover the next fraudulent purchase without raising red flags at the bank. It's a classic financial crime pattern. It's called structuring. It's what people do when they're trying to hide the flow of illicit money. My mother, the woman who preached financial responsibility to me my entire life, was using her skills to manage a slush fund. And I remembered her at the kitchen table every Sunday night when I was growing up, meticulously managing the family budget, tracking every single dollar. She was so proud of her financial acumen. She was using those same skills, that same meticulous attention to detail, to enable and conceal her son's fraud. Who do you think is worse, The person who does the bad thing, or the person who helps them hide it? Let me know your thoughts. This was the deepest betrayal yet. A wound far deeper than the loan. Deeper than the stolen credit. It wasn't just my father's passive compliance. It wasn't just my brother's selfish ambition. My mother was the operational mastermind. She was the one oiling the gears of the conspiracy, the one making sure the accounts were balanced so the fraud could continue undetected. She wasn't just a gaslighter. She wasn't just making excuses. She wasn't just protecting him. She was his accountant. I had the pattern. I had the motive. I had the means. But I needed the source document, the origin of the crime. The original application for the $250,000 loan. My credit report proved it existed, but I needed the paper itself. I needed to see the signatures. I took a deep breath and opened the browser on my secure laptop. I navigated to the website of the small, obscure out-of-state bank that had issued the loan. I found their customer service number and I dialed. I played the part. I was Anna, confused, cooperative, maybe a little overwhelmed. I explained that my accountant needed a copy of my original loan application for my tax records. I told them I just couldn't find my copy anywhere. The representative was friendly. He asked me a few security questions, my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name. I answered them perfectly, of course. They were my details. He said, "No problem, ma'am. I can email a PDF copy right over to you." I gave him my new, secure, pseudonymous email address. A minute later, a notification popped up. The email had arrived. The subject line was, "Your loan application documents." I downloaded the attached file. I opened it. And there it was, 10 pages of official bank paperwork. And on the final page, the signature block. I saw my own name, my own signature. But it was wrong. The slant was too sharp, the loop on the A was too closed. It was a forgery. A clumsy one, but a forgery nonetheless. And right next to it, on the line for the CO signer, was a signature I'd known my entire life. My father's. Bold, clear, and unmistakably authentic. That moment of absolute, undeniable proof. If you received this document, what would be your very next move? No wrong answers. Seeing my name forged on a federal document was jarring. But seeing my father's familiar signature right there, endorsing the lie, sanctioning the crime, it dissolved every last shred of doubt, every lingering, desperate hope I had that he was simply ignorant, that he was a victim too. And his words came back to me, from years ago, when he'd been reviewing a business contract I'd prepared. He'd looked at me over his glasses and said, with such gravity, "Your signature is your bond, Anna. Never sign anything you haven't read." The hypocrisy was so immense, so staggering, it almost took my breath away. He knew. He had read it. He had signed it. He didn't just look the other way. He signed on the dotted line. The evidence matrix was complete. It was a monument to their crimes, built cell by cell, fact by fact. But it was just my analysis, my word against theirs. I knew the next step wasn't confrontation. It was validation. I needed a professional, a third party, to look at my case and tell me if I was standing on solid ground, or if I was just a daughter with a grievance. I researched forensic accountants and corporate lawyers in a city 2 hours away. I found a man with a reputation for being a shark, a specialist in high-stakes internal fraud. I scheduled a 1-hour paid consultation. I used my pseudonym and a burner phone number. I walked into his high-rise office with nothing but my clean laptop in my bag. I didn't cry. I didn't present a tearful, emotional story of family betrayal. I sat down, opened the laptop, and I presented the facts. I opened the project reclamation spreadsheet. I walked him through it, tab by tab. The timeline. The links to the public evidence. The scanned bank statements showing the flow of money. The PDF of the $250,000 fraudulent loan application. He was impassive at first, his face giving nothing away as he listened. But as I clicked through the evidence, I saw a shift in his expression, a flicker of interest. Then, visible surprise at the depth of the documentation. He stopped me when I got to the legal statutes I'd listed for each violation. He leaned forward, studying the screen. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and was silent for a long moment. And I remembered all the times my family had belittled me for being overly methodical, for being too intense, for making things too complicated. All the skills they had mocked, all the traits they had tried to make me feel ashamed of. This shark in $1,000 suit was looking at them with what I can only describe as professional admiration. Have you ever had to get an expert's opinion to confirm your own instincts? That moment of validation is everything, isn't it? He told me in his calm, measured voice that what I had compiled was one of the most thorough pre-litigation packages he'd ever seen from a civilian. He confirmed the severity of every violation: bank fraud, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft. He outlined the potential paths forward, the criminal charges, the civil suits, the leverage I now had. He looked me dead in the eye, then glanced back at my spreadsheet, the one my mother had called obsessive. He looked at my spreadsheet and said, "This isn't a case. This is an indictment." I left the lawyer's office with a clear directive. The digital evidence was powerful, but a confrontation required something more. It required something physical, something they could hold in their hands, something they couldn't just click away from. So my next stop was a 24-hour print shop. I paid cash. I printed every single piece of evidence, in triplicate. The loan application, the bank statements, the screenshots of David's social media posts, correlated with the withdrawals. Every last damning fact. Then I went to an office supply store. I bought 3 2-inch heavy-duty binders. Black. I bought packs of tab dividers and clear sheet protectors. Back in my apartment, my war room, I began to assemble the weapons. This was a process I knew well. I'd made dozens of similar binders in my career. For business proposals, for client presentations, for investor meetings. I'd always used my meticulous organization to build things, to win people over. Now, I was using that exact same professional skill set to dismantle a conspiracy. The irony was not lost on me. I created a cover page for each binder, not with emotional accusations, but with cold, clinical titles. A summary of findings regarding David's last name. A summary of findings regarding mother's name. A summary of findings regarding father's name. Inside, I used the tab dividers to create sections. Tab A, fraudulent loan application. Tab B, misappropriation of joint account. Tab C, public misrepresentation and wire fraud. Each piece of evidence was slid into its own protective sleeve. Clean, clear, undeniable. As I assembled the binders, I felt a grim, absolute sense of purpose. I was no longer just an accountant investigating a crime. I was a prosecutor preparing her exhibits for trial. The finished binders felt heavy in my hands. It was the physical weight of their betrayal. It's time for the final showdown. Are you team digital presentation or team hard copy binder slap on the table? Let me know your style. I knew then exactly how the confrontation would go. There would be no screaming matches, no tearful recriminations. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me emotional. I would not give them an opening to turn this into a family drama. I'm not going to yell. I'm going to present the evidence. With the 3 black binders sitting on my dining table like munitions, I made one final strategic move. I picked up my phone, and I called Michael Vance. The client, their only real asset, the source of the money they were fighting over. My voice was calm, steady, authoritative. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't have to. I just told him I had looked into the irregularities with the Keystone forecasts he'd mentioned. I said I had discovered a number of significant internal issues and that I was in the process of handling it. Then I made my move. I told him I was calling a meeting to resolve the situation the following evening. And then I said the words that sealed their fate. "Michael," I said, "for the sake of our long-standing professional relationship, I'm asking you to not act. Do not make any decisions until you hear from me again." After that meeting, he trusted my competence. He'd always trusted my competence. He agreed. That's a power move. What's the boldest move you've ever made to take control of a situation? I want to hear it. As I hung up the phone, I remembered a time, years ago, when my brother was supposed to lead a big client call and was having a full-blown panic attack. I had to step in at the last minute, calm the client down, and save the deal. I was saving him. Now, here I was, making another call to that same client, with that same calm, authoritative voice. But this time, I wasn't saving my brother. I was cornering him. I had just put a 24-hour hold on their entire business. Their survival now depended entirely on my next move. The power dynamic had shifted, completely and irrevocably. I've just frozen their most important asset. The binders were ready. The final call had been made. The battlefield was set. All I needed were the combatants. I picked up my phone and opened a group text with my parents and my brother. My fingers were perfectly steady as I typed out the bait. "Hi everyone," I wrote. "I've had some time to think, and I'd like to talk about the future and find a way for us all to move forward. Can you meet me at the house tomorrow at 7 p.m. The tone was perfect. Conciliatory. Forgiving. It was exactly what they wanted to hear from the daughter they thought they had broken. The response from my mother was almost immediate. "Of course, honey. We knew you'd come around. We're so proud of you." David and my father chimed in with their agreement a few minutes later. Their eagerness, their condescension, it was the final piece of intelligence I needed. It confirmed they had absolutely no idea what was coming. They believed their own lies. Their guard was completely, utterly down. And I remembered every argument I'd ever had with my mother, where I had a valid, fact-based point. The moment she knew she was losing, she would always pull out the same line, "Let's just all agree to talk and move forward." It was her kill switch. Her way of shutting down any conversation that involved her own accountability. Now, I was using her own manipulative language to summon them to their judgment. What's the best bait you've ever used to get someone to a meeting they didn't want to have? Asking for a friend. They were walking into that living room expecting a surrender. They were expecting tears, apologies, and a request to be welcomed back into the fold. They were expecting the dutiful daughter to finally accept her place. They think I'm waving a white flag, but I'm carrying a briefcase full of bombs. They were all seated. My mother and father on the sofa, my brother David in the armchair. They looked relaxed, expectant. I didn't sit. I stood by the coffee table, my briefcase in my hand. The air was thick with their smug pity. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you for coming. I've prepared a small presentation." The smiles on their faces faltered. I opened the briefcase and took out the first black binder. The one with the label, a summary of findings regarding David, last name. I placed it on the coffee table directly in front of him. It landed with a solid, satisfying thud. He stared at it. "David," I said, my voice even, devoid of all emotion. "Let's start with public misrepresentation." I leaned forward and opened the binder for him. "Please turn to tab A. You'll find the screenshots from your LinkedIn profile there, the ones where you claim my work is your own." He turned the page, his face starting to pale. "Now," I continued, "let's move to the fraudulent reports sent to Michael Vance. That would be wire fraud. You'll find copies of those under tab B." He fumbled with the tab, his hand starting to shake. And finally, I said, my voice unwavering, "Let's review your compensation." I directed him to tab C. There you will find a full accounting of your personal expenditures, cross-referenced with the cash withdrawals and payments from the joint account. Your style is very well documented. He was stammering now, trying to form words that wouldn't come. His confident facade, the one he'd worn his entire life, was crumbling to dust right before my eyes. If you could make one person who wronged you sit down and look at the hard evidence of what they did, who would it be? I felt no anger. Only the grim, quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. And I remembered him years ago, standing right here in this same living room, presenting a project proposal I had written as his own, and my mother praising his wonderful take-charge attitude. Now, I was the one presenting, and the subject was his fraud. Let's review the findings. As David floundered, my mother tried to step in, the CGO, jumping in to manage the narrative. "Anna," she began, her voice taking on that familiar, disappointed tone. "This is not productive. We were trying to protect—" "I have a binder for you too, Mom." I cut her off calmly, my voice slicing through her gaslighting. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the second binder. I placed it in front of her. Her face froze. "Please turn to tab A," I instructed. "Management of Joint Slush Fund. You'll see the full transaction history there, including all of your personal transfers, timed perfectly to cover David's expenses." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. Then I turned to my father, the silent chairman, sitting there as if he were just a spectator. I retrieved the third and final binder and placed it in front of him. "Dad," I said, my voice still quiet, still clinical. "Tab A, co-signing of fraudulent loan application. Tab B, authorization of payments from joint account." I reached out and tapped the copy of the loan application inside the binder. "This is your signature, is it not?" The man who had built his identity on not making waves was now at the center of a tidal wave that was about to crash over all of them. He just stared at the page, his face ashen. The united front was shattered. Confronted with individual evidence of their own specific crimes, they couldn't protect each other. Their core philosophies, my mother's belief that she knew what was best, and my father's desire to not make waves, were now just Exhibit A and Exhibit B in their indictment. Have you ever had to be the bad guy to hold your own family accountable? It's one of the loneliest, most necessary jobs. Shara, if you've been there. This was the hardest part. Staring at the people who were supposed to protect me, and methodically severing the final cords of filial duty with the cold, sharp edge of the truth. But they weren't my parents in that moment. They were conspirators. The time for your side of the story is over. We're now in the documentation review phase. The room was utterly silent, thick with their shock and their fear. They were finally beginning to understand the depth of the hole they had dug. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the evidence settle on them. Then I spoke again, my voice still calm, still in control. "There are two paths forward from here," I announced. "Path A is that these three binders, along with my full testimony, go to the district attorney, the IRS, and to Michael Vance. That's Path A." I paused. Then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the coffee table into the space between them. "And then there's Path B." It was a settlement agreement, drafted by my lawyer. The terms were simple. There were 3 conditions. 1, I said, ticking it off. The $250,000 loan is to be immediately paid off in full, from your personal assets. 2, I will be installed as the sole managing director of the company, with full unilateral control of all finances and operations. And 3, David is to be removed from the company, permanently. "You two," I said, looking at my parents, "will retain your shares, but you will have 0 operational input, effective immediately." She's taking back everything. What one thing would you demand in this situation that you couldn't live without? I thought of my father, handing me a meager allowance check from the profits of the business I was essentially running, telling me I should be grateful for the opportunity. Now I was dictating the terms of their entire financial future. The power in the room had transferred, completely and irrevocably. I was no longer the employee. I was no longer the responsible one. I was the bank. I was the law. And I was the board of directors. I held all the cards. This is not a negotiation, these are my terms. The moment my terms were laid out on the table, the shocked silence shattered. Chaos erupted. It wasn't a discussion. It was an implosion. My mother, the CGO, started first. Her voice was pleading, bargaining. She asked if we couldn't just find another way. If I could just be paid back. If David could just be given a different role. My brother, David, didn't defend himself. He didn't apologize. He turned on our father. He started yelling, his voice cracking, shouting that he'd been told this was all handled, that it was all approved. And my father, the silent chairman, just sat there staring at the binders, utterly defeated. A captain whose ship had already sunk. I didn't engage. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there and watched them. It was like observing a chemical reaction in a beaker. The family unit I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place in, it had dissolved in seconds. It was never a unit. It was just 3 terrified individuals, all scrambling to save themselves. And I remembered the day they pushed me out. How they had stood together, presenting a united front. They kept using the word we. We think it's for the best. We've decided. There was no we in this room now. There was only you, watching the people who wronged you turn on each other. Is there anything more satisfying? Let me know what you think. I let them burn themselves out. When the shouting finally subsided into ragged breaths, I simply reached out and tapped the single sheet of paper on the coffee table. The settlement agreement? My voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos. You have 24 hours to sign, I said. My call with Michael Vance is tomorrow morning. He's expecting an update on the company's leadership. That name, Michael Vance, was the final blow. The mention of the client, the source of all their legitimate income, silenced them completely. The fight was over. They knew they had no choice. The conspiracy collapsed the moment I turned on the lights. The next day, a courier delivered a large envelope to my apartment. Inside was the agreement, signed by all 3 of them. I didn't feel a rush of victory, just the quiet, solid confirmation of a transaction completed. I took the document, put it in my briefcase, and drove to the office. Office. I walked past the reception desk, my heels clicking on the floor. I didn't look at anyone. I went straight to the main office, the one my brother had occupied, and I sat down at the desk. The first thing I did was log into the server with the new credentials my father had been forced to provide. Then, I began the purge. One by one, I changed every single password, every admin key, every backdoor. I revoked all access for my brother, deleting his user profile completely. Then I revoked my parents' credentials. I locked them out of the system they had tried to steal. I drafted a single, simple email to the entire staff. It read, "Effective immediately, I will be resuming the role of managing director. I look forward to working with you all to ensure a smooth transition." I hit send. She got the keys to the kingdom back. What's the very first thing you would do on day 1 of being the new boss? Then, I made the most important call. I dialed Michael Vance. I told him there had been a significant internal management issue. I told him it had been permanently resolved. And I told him that I was personally overseeing his account from now on. I promised to send over the real Keystone forecast within the hour. The relief in his voice was palpable. It was the sound of a client who had gotten his most trusted asset back. And as I sat there, at that desk, the same desk I'd been forced to pack my things at 6 months ago, in total humiliation, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound sense of rightness. Like stepping back into my own skin, after wearing a stranger's clothes for far too long. The damage was real. The work ahead was hard. But for the first time in months, nothing in my life was a lie. The work begins now. The real work. I'm sitting in that same office now. It's late. The building is silent. I have a cup of tea in my hand, and the company's financials are open on my laptop. The real numbers this time. Not the inflated nonsense my brother was sending out. The truth is, we're in a deficit. I'm cleaning up a mess he made. A fire started with money stolen in my name. My phone hasn't rung. There have been no texts, no emails with desperate apologies. There's only a transactional silence from the people who were once the center of my world. And I know, with a certainty that doesn't hurt anymore, that the relationship I thought I had with my family is over. It was an illusion. And that knowledge comes with 2 distinct feelings. There's a loss, of course. The quiet grief for the family I wished I had. But underneath it, there is a powerful, undeniable sense of liberation. I am no longer the workhorse. I am no longer the responsible one tasked with holding a dysfunctional and destructive system together. I am the founder, not of this company, not really, the founder of my own life. I remember, fleetingly, a time when I truly believed we were a team, a family working toward a common goal. That memory doesn't bring pain anymore, It brings clarity. It's a snapshot of a business model that was built on a lie, a foundation of exploitation, a model I have now demolished and replaced with the truth. She won, but it cost her a family. Was it worth it? Let me know your final verdict in the comments. And thank you for being a part of this story. In the end, this was the biggest, most important investigation of my career. A full forensic analysis of my own life. I tracked the assets and the liabilities. I identified the fraud. I calculated the losses. And I made a final executive decision based on the data. I audited my own life. And I wrote off the bad debt.